What's up? How's it going? Thanks for clicking on the video. In today's video, before the brackets lock in and stuff and that challenge is over, I am going to run through the women's bracket real quick and just give my, personal opinion on who I think might be able to win the national championship for the women. I would say I'm a pretty casual fan. On the Sundays and Saturdays that I've gone and bugged my sister at work and stuff, she works at a sports bar, usually there'd be an Iowa game on or a South Carolina game, and so I've watched a few of the college basketball games this year for them. I think the biggest sleepers personally is going to be Iowa. You never know with UConn if they're going to have success in the tournament like all those years in the past when they were just so dominant. So yeah, no, I like to follow along here and there, and I've made predictions in the past, like for history's sake, going recent history. In 2021, I picked out of the Alamo region. I thought Stanford would represent the Alamo region against South Carolina. And then over in the Riverwalk region, I had no doubt UConn. They were 24-1, so I thought they would be over there on that side of the bracket. And then out of the Mercado region, Texas A&M. This was before South Carolina got really good. I picked Stanford, and then I picked UConn. Then I picked UConn winning the 2021 national championship. And then in 2022, I had South Carolina representing. I had Baylor representing Wichita. I had UConn representing Bridgeport. Then I had Stanford representing Spokane. And then for my pick for the final, I had a rematch of the year prior, Final Four, where I had South Carolina playing Stanford in the final back last year for the 2022 national championship in Minnesota. So those were my picks last year, and these are my picks this year. So let's get into it. Let's do the Seattle 4 region. All right, Stanford against Sacred Heart. Gonna pick Stanford. Ole Miss against Gonzaga. I'm gonna go with a little bit of that 9-8 upset. I'm gonna go with Gonzaga in this one. Louisville against Drake. I'm gonna roll with the cards and say Louisville moves on. Texas against East Carolina. I'm gonna pick Texas. Colorado versus MTSU. I'm gonna pick Colorado. Duke against Iona. I'm gonna pick Duke. Florida against Georgia. Now, if this was a football game, I think we would know the outcome, but I'm going to roll with Florida State. And then out of Iowa and Southeast Louisiana, I'm going to go with the safe 2 pick and pick Iowa. Stanford against Gonzaga. I'm going to roll with the Cardinals and say Stanford moves on. Louisville against Texas. I'm going to pick that fun upset and say that Louisville beats Texas and moves on to play Stanford in the next round. Then out of Colorado and Duke, I'm going to go with the safe pick and say Duke is going to win that one. And then out of Florida State and Iowa, not sleeping on Iowa, man. Iowa's going to move on and play Duke. Louisville against Stanford. Stanford's been way good this year. They have the better record. Clearly, they're heavily favored in this. And then playing them in the region final, I'm picking Iowa over Duke. And so it's going to be number 1 Stanford against number 2 Iowa in this region's championship. This is going to be my big upset for this bracket. I'm going to pick Iowa. I'm feeling good about it, and so I'm going to roll with Iowa into the Final Four, even though they might show up and Stanford could blow them out of the water because they're the number 1 seed, but not so fast. So I'm picking the Hawkeyes to move on. South Carolina versus Norfolk. South Carolina is probably going to blow them out of the water, which that's fine. All right. South Florida versus Marquette. I'm going to pick Marquette versus Portland. I'm going to pick Portland. Psych! I'm going to pick UCLA versus Sacramento State. I'm going to roll with the Lady Bruins. Creighton versus Mississippi State. I'm going to play it safe and go with Creighton. Notre Dame against Southern Utah. I'm going to roll with the Lady Irish on that one. Then Arizona versus West Virginia. I feel like this Arizona team is going to represent a lot better than the men's Arizona team in this bracket. So I'm going to roll with Arizona. Out of Maryland and Holy Cross, I'm going to pick the safe pick and say Maryland. Out of South Carolina and Marquette. South Carolina is just way too good. I have them rolling on. Then out of Oklahoma and UCLA. Personally, I'm a Sooner at heart, so Boomer Sooner. I have them moving on. Creighton and Notre Dame. I'm going to go with the Lady Irish and say they move on. And then out of Arizona and Maryland, I'm going to keep with Arizona and continue with them as they get on that hot streak and go on a little bit of a run in this bracket. And I'm going to say Arizona is going to go play Notre Dame. So out of number 3 Notre Dame and number 7 Arizona, this is where I have the tournament run ending. I'm going to have Notre Dame move on to the region final. South Carolina against Oklahoma. I'm going to go with the safe pick and say the Gamecocks are going to win that one. And so for the region final, it's going to be South Carolina number 1 and Notre Dame number 3. I'm going to go with South Carolina moving on to the Final Four. I have Indiana moving on past the first round. And then Oklahoma State versus Miami. I have Oklahoma State. Washington State versus FGCU. I'll pick the Cougars. Villanova versus Cleveland State. I'll pick the Lady Wildcats. Michigan versus UNLV. I'll pick Michigan. LSU against Hawaii. I'll pick LSU. NC State against Princeton. I'll pick NC State. Utah versus Gardner-Webb. I'm going to roll with the Lady Utes and have them moving on to the next round. Indiana against Oklahoma State. I'm going to roll with the #1 team and have them move on to the next round. Washington State against Villanova. I'm going to go with that safe pick, Villanova. Then out of Michigan and LSU. This will be a really big matchup and probably one of the best games of the tournament up to date. And I'm going to say that LSU moves on. And then out of NC State and Utah, I'm going to pick Utah. All right, out of Indiana and Villanova, honestly, I'm really torn. I'm just going to pick the safe pick, go with my gut, and say that the Hoosiers are going to move on. And then out of LSU and Utah, I'm going to roll with the Lady Tigers. And so for the Greensville 2 Region Championship, Indiana versus LSU, I'm going to pick another upset like the Iowa Hawkeye one and say that the LSU Lady Tigers are moving on to the Final Four. In the Seattle Region 3 bracket, Virginia Tech versus Chattanooga. Virginia Tech, they're the ACC champs, and so I'm going to have them moving on. USC versus South Dakota. I'm going to roll with the Trojans. Iowa State against Toledo. I'm going to roll with Iowa State. Tennessee I'm going to roll with the Lady Vols. North Carolina against Purdue. I'm going to roll with the Tar Heels. Ohio State and James Madison. I'm going to pick Ohio State. Baylor against Alabama. UConn against Vermont. Again, a lot of people are sleeping on UConn. UConn's still UConn. Virginia Tech against USC. I'm going to roll with Virginia Tech. Iowa State against Tennessee. I'm going to roll with the Volunteers. The Tar Heels against Ohio State. I have an upset here. I'm going to pick the 6 seed over the 3 seed. Go Tar Heels. #7 Baylor versus #2 UConn. I'm going to play it safe. I would like that upset, but UConn's UConn, like I said, so I'm going to roll with UConn. And then out of Virginia Tech and Tennessee, I'm picking the upset. I'm going to take Tennessee. And then out of North Carolina and UConn, I'm going to pick UConn. Then for the Seattle Region 3 Championship between Tennessee and UConn, I'm going to pick the 2 seed and have UConn go to the Final Four. Then in the Final Four, let's go on the left side. South Carolina versus Iowa. I just think with how big of a program that South Carolina has become, with how good they've recently been, I think they're a little bit too much for Iowa, and so I'll have South Carolina moving on to the national championship. And then with LSU and UConn, both teams have had a pretty decent season. A lot of people would just look at the history and go, oh man, UConn's going to win this. They'll roll right into the national championship. I'm not going to follow that trend. I'm going to roll with the Tigers and have LSU playing South Carolina in the final. With the national championship between South Carolina and LSU, I think South Carolina is a little too much to handle. Just like how they won the national championship against UConn, I have South Carolina going back-to-back as national champs for the Women's March Madness bracket. Thanks for watching. I'll keep up to date on it the best I can, but we'll catch you in the next video. Deuces.